cries, and it just grows dark with rage and make me wish for something new.
All right, this is Stan with the Punk Rock Chronicles, back for another episode. And we are super, super excited today to have a couple special guests with us. We're at a photo exhibit at a location called These Days. And we've got Jim Saah, and he has the In My Eyes photo exhibit, which really chronicles 1982 to 1997. Hardcore punk and just it really encapsulating the time period really well. So we're really excited. And obviously we have Jennifer Finch, and she's joining us today to help us carry on the conversation. So how are you both doing today?
I'm very well, thank you.
You doing good?
I'm doing great.
And then we have
asking.
You bet. We have our trusted Bob the Bastard.
Hello. Good to see you again, Jen.
He is a Bob and he is a bastard.
I am a bastard.
I can verify.
Yes, he's a legitimate bastard. And what's beautiful about today, it's over 100 degrees on a September afternoon on a Sunday. And so we're kind of battling the heat a little bit, but this place has decent air conditioning, so I think we're okay. But yeah, so I just wanted to, I guess we just dive into this. And Jim, can you just talk a little bit about this exhibit that you have going on right now?
Sure. Well, in October of 21, I put out my first book. My photographs have been in many books, but this is my first solo book. And I made it, people have been telling me to do a book for a long time, and if I did it, I wanted to just like do it and give it the fine art treatment. So I put out this 12 by 12 inch, 6-pound book with over 300 images in it and 60 bands. And I had a photo exhibit somewhat similar to this one in DC to launch the book. And it went really well, even though it was the kind of in the middle of COVID. I think it was a little after the lockdown, but people were still all, crazed about it. And my opening, everyone had a mask and stuff. But I wasn't really able to take it on the road because, people didn't really want to do in-person events so much. So I thought when things calmed down, I would take it on the road. And then the book had sold out in a year. I guess a lot of people were home, like looking online, and it did really well. I sold out just through our Shopify store and everything. So I really wanted to get out on the road, and I love talking to people and talking about the photographs. So we put out a limited edition, second edition of the book, and now I've had a show in New York, in Richmond, here. I'm going to have one next year in Baltimore and Philadelphia, and it's great. I mean, I'm always very thankful to people that come out, and this is just stuff that I shot when I've been a photographer my whole life, and that's all I've ever done. But this era, not all of it, but a lot of it was shot when I was in high school, and it was a passion. And if someone told me that some podcasters are going to want to talk about this stuff 40 years from now, I'd be like, well, first I'd be like, what's a podcast? And then I'd be like, you're crazy, and I'm just thankful and grateful that people really, this work resonates with people. I heard a lot of that last night from people that came to the show.
Yeah, I've been looking at your photos too, and I recognize so many of them. So for me as a kid, looking at these photos originally when I was younger, I couldn't imagine interviewing the photographer. So I think we're in the same boat there, having this conversation.
Yeah.
Did you say what the book is called?
Yeah, it's called In My Eyes, Photographs from 1982 to 1997.
And did you do the annotation, and who wrote the foreword?
I wrote the foreword, and there's interviews in it also. My idea, there's very little words. It's like a coffee table photo book, but in the back, there's several interviews, and I was interested. My idea was like experimenting with the intersection of visual art and music and how they influence one another. So I interviewed musicians that do visual art. I interviewed artists that are very influenced by music, and some artists that do both, like John Langford of the Mekons. He's a great painter, illustrator, and great musician. Shepard Fairey, who's not a musician but very influenced by punk rock and music in general, stuff like that.
It's a great name too, and if I read correctly, your first show was actually a Minor Threat show, wasn't it?
Correct. Yeah, the first show I went to, I didn't photograph, but wow, what a first show to go to, because I could have saw, I don't know, a band the band that would become my favorite band was my first show. So it was just, and I have to say, like, I don't know, there's a lot of good bands, a lot of good DC bands, but there's just like, I'll occasionally play Void or something, but I listen to Minor Threat all the time today, and it's not nostalgia. They're just still really good songs, and they make me feel the way, and the playing was tight, and so yeah, I still listen to them. And it was GI, Government Issue, and Minor Threat, and then the second show was a hardcore matinee. It was GI and Scream, who's still playing today and are still great. And they have a new record that is really
Agreed.
good.
It's a great record.
Yeah. And then Discharge, which those matinees didn't usually have national acts. They were mostly local bands, but I actually proved Ian MacKaye wrong with that one. It's something I rarely do, because he said that wasn't a matinee. I booked most of those, and we never had national acts, but I found a flyer, and it said hardcore matinee, 3 p.m., Discharge, and he was like, kind of fucked with his head. He's like, I'm slipping. Because he takes huge pride in knowing that stuff. And he's, most of the time, he helped me ID all these photos, not only his bands, but like anything that I was stumped on as a date, he could usually find it if he didn't have it already.
Your photography kind of went hand in hand with your developing love for the hardcore scene of DC. How long before you started taking pictures of the shows?
Almost immediately. I was taking a photography class in high school, and just because it was an elective and it seemed fun, and I thought, it'd be cool to be in the dark room, and it's kind of magical. You see the images come up in the chemicals, and I was getting into it. I was taking pictures of my friends and my cat and different things, and then I went to this punk rock show, and I was like, wow, like this kinetic energy, like I have to try and capture this. And then I sometimes my friends would say, just go and enjoy the show and don't take your camera. But like, I did not enjoy the show when I took my camera. I actually occasionally I wouldn't take my camera. I'd listen to them, and I'm in the back and goofing around with them, and I'm not paying as much attention. Like, I really concentrated on the show when I took pictures, and enjoyed it more because I really was getting the music and feeling it and everything.
Yeah, documenting it. It's like you're actually just not a guest watching, but you're more of a, I don't know, it makes it more special in my opinion. When we go to shows nowadays, we document them too. I feel more involved and more into it, like you're saying.
Yeah, and you could participate. Like back then, it wasn't. Sometimes nowadays you have a camera and the band puts a lot of restrictions on you. They're like, first 3 songs, no flash, and sometimes I don't know if they do it on purpose, but like sometimes the first 3 songs they'll barely have any light on, or it'll all be a blue wash or whatever, and it's just, I don't know if they're trying to make it hard to get good photos of them, but back then you could just shoot the whole show and use a flash or whatever.
So I know, Jennifer, you were shooting at the same time, parallel, right? And essentially the same era. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences out here in LA shooting?
Yeah, they sound very similar. You know, going to shows, kind of recognizing that it was a little bit more fun to go and document and have something to do, particularly being like a little bit socially awkward. For me, I was able to enter the scene and contribute to the scene, which was something that I wouldn't have only been able to do if I was older and could promote or do a fanzine or record as a musician. And yeah, that was eventually my trajectory. I did start shooting.
Were you shooting music before you were playing music?
Oh yeah,
A long time. Did going to shows and photographing them make you want to pick up an instrument and be in a band?
No, just being in the performance element. Like my story is more about seeing photographs of punk rock and never have hearing the music.
Be like, I want to do that.
Yeah, I wanted the performance of it that was documented. So I was more interested in the interactions between audience and musician. And, you know, when Barricades came up, as we were talking, I lost interest because then it clearly, as you were saying, the first 3 songs, it just clearly lost interest. It wasn't an expression anymore. It wasn't a performance between image maker and, you know, subject.
Yeah, like I was telling you in the beginning, like that picture of Minor Threat where Ian MacKaye's just laying on a whole pile of people. Like there's, you know, I was on the stage with all those people.
Exactly.
Taking that
You were
picture.
in the pile, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was our experiences in Los Angeles as well, my experience.
Did you ever photograph any DC bands when they came through? Do you recall?
I was an LA snob. You know, even when Minor Threat came, there was like not a lot of interest, although I understood when a band from DC would come to Los Angeles, it was monumental. Like it was a very big deal. And to have Henry Rollins exported to Los Angeles to represent and be the front person of, you know, one of our bands, there was a lot of opinion going on and about that. And like the sort of, you know, making our local scene international, which right? DC had the same kind of feeling at that time.
Yeah, Discord always used, I mean, it was a joke, but they said putting DC on the map on all their records and stuff. And, you know, I mean, musically, it kind of ended up, you know, being true. Like, I think I give Ian and Jeff, and mostly Ian, a lot of credit for just keeping Discord alive and those records available. I don't think they'd be, you know, there was kids that came last night that were, you know, early 20s that totally are in punk bands and totally influenced by this era, and I think the fact that, you know, they're still around and you can still get those records at a good price and everything means a lot. It's kept it alive.
Do you think that it is nostalgia for the music or nostalgia for the idea of geography, and that maps clearly defined our original tastes and expressions?
Well, I usually shy away from the word nostalgia, like the plague, because I'm not. I'm definitely not trying to relive any kind of glory days or recapture my youth with any of this. I've grown and I photographed things my whole life. I photographed, the 930 Club opened up this new club, and there was 44 shows that were kind of special shows. And big bands played this 400-seat place, like, you know, Pretenders and Foo Fighters and stuff. And I photographed all 44 of those shows, and well, I think there's two parts to that question. It's not, I think if for the people that lived it, they will come up to me and say, like, this period, like, shaped who I am. And I completely get that, because it did the same thing for me. I mean, if it wasn't for punk rock, I mean, I learned about politics, art, you know, I just opened my mind to, in my intro, Patti Smith, I close with a Patti Smith quote that says, you know, punk is just another word for freedom. And I think that's great. And so for those people, it might be a little nostalgia, but it's like, it's meaningful. It's not just like, oh, I was young and having fun and I look cool and I had girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever. And it was like, it changed them. So there's that. And then as far as geography, I think, maybe I'm partial, but I've asked people, like Glenn Friedman came through with his Black Flag book, and, I asked him, if he could give me the differences, because he's familiar. He's never lived in D.C., but he's friends with those guys. He's familiar with the scene. And then, he's been here and then New York. So I said, what's the difference between the LA scene and DC scene? I said, we have there's always been a community here where we support one another. And I've known some of these people for like 40 years. And, there's a love and camaraderie, and people, there's not really... there's competition between bands, and sometimes there was some discord, like animosity, like they're the cool kids, and why can't I be on Discord or whatever? But a little bit of that, but not so much. And I said, how is that different from LA? And he's like, it's like completely different. Like there was violence in DC, like early on, like the Georgetown punks, like Ian and Henry jocks would jump out of Camaros and try and beat them up just for looking different. They'd be like, hey, diva, what the fuck,
But there wasn't an infiltration like there was in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and the cops too, like the DC. It was during the crack epidemic, and there was a lot of drugs, and you might get held up, for your money if you had any, but usually, like, cops wouldn't come and beat up everyone like out here. And then, some guy that owns this gallery grew up lived here his whole life, and he was telling me sometimes he wouldn't go to shows because it'd just be, a riot, and, he's not a small guy. He probably handle himself, but who wants to, fucking get between the gangs and the cops?
Sure, he came of coming of age is such a dumb expression, but started going to shows in 83, 84. So he didn't carry with him the energy of the previous hold your space that many people who grew up in punk rock in Los Angeles kind of will talk about with you guys. Like, we just held our space in it and waited, hoped it passed.
Yeah.
Do you think regarding the police, I found that interesting. They wouldn't come beat you up like they did out here in Southern California. Do you think it was because of the political climate in DC? You know what I mean? Is there like more of people watching the cops a little bit more?
I don't know. I think cops are cops mainly, but I think they were a little more fascist out here. Like, after. I used to read about it in Maximum Rock and Roll and stuff, like back in the day, and then, we hear it from Henry and stuff, and then there was the whole Rodney King thing, and then OJ. Like, it's just the cops out here are kind of more notorious. I think cops kind of suck everywhere, but the DC cops back then, they just, if you were just having a punk rock show and you weren't doing anything, they didn't really care. They're not going to show up just to beat you up for fun. I don't remember. There was a few times where the fire marshal came in and, like that Dead Kennedys photo I have right there. That show almost got shut down by the fire marshal, and Jello and Ian went backstage with the fire marshal and worked it out, and the show went on. But yeah, I don't really remember ever being hassled by the cops very much.
I always found myself fascinated by the DC scene because it's, as Ian is quoted as saying, it's a transient state, right? DC. So a lot of people coming in and out for government jobs, whatever. There's a lot of moving around. So to keep this like nucleus of this music scene there and keep it strong, and you almost have to be tight knit. Whereas LA, it's more of it eats its own. It seems like there's a lot of competition, and there's a lot. You know what I mean? Everybody's kind of elbowing each other to get a slot or get noticed. but out there it seemed a little more tight knit from an outsider's perspective. Observing that scene, did you feel that way to you?
I think you're absolutely right, and I didn't want to, with all you guys from LA, I didn't want to say something like "eat your own" or competition.
Well, I'll
but
say
I'm glad you
I'll
did.
say it. I mean,
Because-
I'm not saying it's always the case, but
Yeah.
there's a part of that.
Yeah, there is. I feel that is a part. In DC, it is very transient, but almost all the people that were in the bands, at least the first wave and stuff, all were born in the area. I mean, some are kids of like ambassadors and stuff like that, so they moved to DC. I think there's a few cases like that, but I think it's either, I don't know if it's necessarily that it's that the transient nature of it. I mean, people are always surprised that I was born and raised in DC because like there's not many, because it is so transient. But I just think that it created a scene that everyone was really enthusiastic about. Like I invited Ian Svenonius from Nation of Ulysses and the makeup and stuff. He lives out here now. I invited him to the show, and he's like, he had a show last night. He couldn't come, but someone told him about the show, and he was like, "Oh, I've known that guy since I was 14 years old, and he was one of the first people I met at a show, and he was this spazzy little kid that was just like really excited, and everyone was really excited, and it was contagious, and you wanted to support it, you wanted to go to shows, you wanted to make a fanzine, you wanted to start a band, and there's new bands now that I try to, I don't get out as much as I would like, but I'd go to support local music still.
I still, going back to when you guys were talking about the nostalgia, I go regionally now more than anything to find my bands, and not just new bands, which of course I like to keep up on, but the bands from Chicago and different places, even Idaho and Pennsylvania, that I missed the first time around. You know what I mean? There's an endless supply, and the way things are now with the resources we have, the internet and whatever, you can find any obscure band that was around for 2 years and put out a 7-inch and one full length that broke up, but had 2 amazing, groundbreaking songs that went national or won, or just people that just, it's endless, So the punk rock thing, it's not stale, and in my opinion, it can be nostalgic if that's how you want to play it. You want to stay in your head, stay in your box. And there's people that do that. They listen to the same 4 bands every single day, get in the car and it's the same 4 bands. Cool, man, if that's your gig. But you could spend the rest of your life discovering not just new bands, but bands that you didn't see in 81, 82, 83, and onward and upward,
Right. I wasn't necessarily talking about nostalgia as us having experienced it, but how people are entering the scene to discover their own cultural expressions and definitions. Are they being nostalgic to look back as I did, looking back at a garage rock or original rock and roll, bringing that into punk?
Oh, I see, yeah.
And even while I was going to punk shows, I was going and seeing Buddy Guy and John Lee Hooker and, older acts, because at that time they were playing in the same spaces that punk rock was being performed in Los Angeles.
I think that is, though, too. Yeah. Because
and that was me looking at nostalgia.
Yeah.
Not thinking that our scene was going to be something that I'd carry along with, we didn't think about it back then, of course.
Yeah, I totally get that, because I had a lot of brothers and sisters that were really into music. And, my sister went to Woodstock, and she actually saw the Beatles in 1964 and at the first show in DC at the Washington Coliseum. And so I had a lot of music in the house, but it was all 60s stuff. It was the Stones and the Beatles and Bob Dylan and Jefferson Airplane and different stuff. And I was into that music. And my father owned a diner, and they had a jukebox, and when they changed their records out, they bring the 45s home. So I had all these, Shimmy Shimmy Cocoa Pop and all these little pop 60s songs. And I liked all that stuff. So I was a music fan really early on. And then in middle school in the late 70s, I kind of had a nostalgia for like, oh, I missed all the good music, like all the 60s stuff, you know? And then I discovered punk rock shortly thereafter, and I'm like, initially, I mean, you know, I didn't shun all of it, but I'm like, you know, fuck my brother's music and sister's music. Like, this is my music. You know, I found my music. And sure, I still like Bob Dylan and stuff. I did, you know, push back with like, you know, kids in school be like, Led Zeppelin sucks, dinosaurs, you know, and like Pink Floyd, blah. But it's funny that as I've aged and stuff, and like some of these pictures I took 40 years ago, and in 1980, it seemed like a world apart, but like 1965 is like just 15 years, and 15 years now, it's like some of these pictures I took 40 years ago, you know? I mean, there's more distance between, you know, Nirvana ending and now than there was the Beatles breaking up and me in 1980 thinking, damn, I missed out on all the good music and stuff. So it kind of goes with what you're saying about, especially now with the internet and stuff, like you're never late to the party.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
It's like you can always, I just did this little tour with Jay Robbins from Jawbox, and, you know, he's a music producer, and like, we both are steeped in music. We love music, but I would say, have you ever heard this band or this band? And he'd be like, no. And then I'd play some, and then he'd do the same to me. And there's still tons of bands that I haven't heard, and we're still turning each other on to good music.
It's fun. I'm curious, Jennifer, I'm curious about something. You made me think how awesome and lucky we are to live in Southern California, and LA in particular, because every act nationally comes through here. If they, you know what I mean? It's a stop for everyone from every part of, you know, the world.
If you're into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you know, well, I mean, you definitely were, right? Because you saw a lot of acts that weren't necessarily just punk rock acts back then, right?
Well, I mean, for commercial expressions of acts, no. I didn't really start going to like shows until the late 80s, early 90s
Really?
to go see bigger shows. Yeah, well, there was so much local.
Yeah. Well, I don't necessarily
to
mean
see.
like the big, you know, like the Bostons or any of that. I mean, you know, local, not local touring bands, newer bands, maybe even just in punk rock or alternative. But it was kind of a target-rich environment for you, right? Like a lot, every weekend there was a good.
Yeah, every night.
Every night.
You know, Tuesday, Wednesday at the Starwood, on the regular, you know, by 83, 84, these larger bands like international acts. So 84, we were talking about police brutality in Los Angeles. I think that's a reflection both of, I mean, I'm just going to say real estate boom or bust. You know, we had to move poor people out of neighborhoods to gentrify. Punk rock was going, larger punk rock shows were going into the abandoned spaces and being able to turn those abandoned spaces over quickly. And one of the things I always like to say, the difference between the DC scene and the LA scene, was that a lot of people in the DC scene went on to go to college and then returned to your scene. Different. Yeah. In our scene, it was straight, you know, pit to prison. And people would come back from prison, and that would curate the experience at the show. More so like the idea of like, you know, hierarchies in the pit, you know, what is masculinity? You know, how is masculinity expressed in groups of people? And it was fucking violent and gnarly, right?
Yeah, we had the gangs. So did you guys have the gangs in DC though? No, there wasn't like the gangs that we had out here.
No, they're just nothing like here. There was, yeah, I mean, there was a few people that identified as a group or a gang, and then much later there were these like Latino gangs, but way later. There wasn't gang.
Yeah, there was
stuff.
no need for affiliation, which is why I find that scene so unique.
That's a
That makes
Where
sense. That's a
in
good-
Boston, there was need for affiliation. They had gangs at their shows in the early 80s. They didn't look the way we were used to gangs, but there was that, we're going to the show in a group.
like
with a-
skinheads or something.
Yeah.
When did you start breaking into music as far as playing gigs and locally, and what year would it have been?
Yeah, I started playing music in '82, but I was really interested more in performance, like I'm kind of saying. So I played in a band called and we would go to parking structures, plug in, invite friends to see the shows, and then leave when the police showed up or security showed up. Like that was the kind of stuff I was more interested in than.
Did you notice a shift from 82 to 87, 88 as it got a little more violent? Because for us, we came up around 86, 87, and the violence had killed off so much of the scene. It was trying to rebuild itself by the, by the late 80s, early 90s. It was
Sure.
trying to rebuild from all that. We're banned from clubs, no punk rock here, no bands here.
Right, which is a similar experience as mentioned in Salad Days. Did we talk about your participation in Salad Days yet?
Yeah, I was the director of photography on that, and I edited and produced with my friend Scott Crawford, who wrote and directed it. I was just, you made me think of that because that was the same thing that happened in DC. It became violent because people started seeing photographs and a little bit of video of these punk rock shows, and a lot of suburban jocks, aggro, frustrated people said, oh, that, they weren't into the music, but they're like, we'll go to the shows and like slam dance. And the early part where you could jump off the stage and like 100 hands would be picking you up if you hit the floor, or people would catch you and stuff. And then later in like 84, 85, just these jarheads started showing up and were like, this is how you slam dance, you hit everything in front of you, and then a lot of people stopped going to shows, and me included, for sort of that. Plus a lot of my favorite bands broke up, like Void and Minor Threat and Scream.
Went to college.
Yeah, well, some of them did go to college. Definitely. Ian never went to college, but like Lyle and Presler, like that's why they broke up before he went away to school. But that was definitely a thing. But then that was the whole point of Revolution Summer, because
They came back from college.
yeah, and they didn't even advertise those shows a lot. It was like they didn't want people. They'd be at a restaurant called Food for Thought that Dante Ferrando's parents owned, that he ended up owning the Black Hat and stuff, and in Gray Matter, and they wouldn't really advertise them. And my friends were saying like, "Hey, there's these new bands that are good. You should check them out." And I was like, "Yeah, I will." But I was into a lot of different bands by then. Like I was seeing Talking Heads and Elvis Costello and stuff. And I kind of missed Revolution Summer because those notoriously DC bands would only be a band for like 9 months. I think Rites of Spring played like 15 shows or something, and then their record came out after, posthumously after they broke up. Like Embrace's record did, like SOA, like so many bands that happened. And so you had that same experience in LA where like there was a backlash. Did the people do something to come back and not have it be so violent?
I think that the people came back and distributed differently with different tastes. Specifically, that's what our Revolution Summer looked like. However, if you look at bands that are still playing today, like name a band do you still know that's
Like
from
TSOL or are you talking about LA?
Yeah,
Circle Jerks?
they went to school. They went to school in '82.
Yeah.
Bad Religion,
Yeah.
No Effects. Like we were out of there, like there's at least 8 of us that we're going to get in any state school that we can, and we all landed in San Francisco for later '84. I didn't have the grades, but I got in '85, and then kind of returned home '87, '88, and I think that parallels a lot with many of the communities that were creating art, not just us, but had that kind of privilege and access. So a lot of scenes, whether you're talking about punk rock, but the go-go scene did not have a dip at that time because they didn't necessarily lose people to college, right? They stayed and ran business, like how Ian stayed and ran business out of DC.
So interesting, the musically cultural shifts that happen that lead artists to congregate in different places. San Francisco is a big one. And you get all these bands that are, I think, much more free to create a kind of an art that's outside of the norm. Butthole Surfers comes to mind. Bands that do really abstract, fun stuff where, they kind of, but they were in Frisco. And then you have bands even from other scenes, metal bands. Metallica moves over to the Bay Area, right? Because they wanted to do their thing out there at a better audience. I'm not saying that better audience, I should not say that. But I'm saying there just seems to be a migration sometimes of music that goes to different places. And why, if that's true, if that's not just me, why would that be?
I think for Los Angeles and unfortunately for DC, the performers that were forefronted that had played since 81, 82 were very masculine presenting. Right. They were very unhinged and they were athletic when they were those ages. So the audience could come in and mimic that kind of masculinity, and that may not have been, like, clearly in DC it wasn't even the forefronting philosophy like it was in Los Angeles. Right.
And did the DC scene's evolution to post-punk, was that a purposeful way of separating from that early violent hardcore scene? Like, you had bands like Embrace and Rise of Springs, and then bands like that, the post-punk era.
Yeah, I don't know if it was, I think people were just growing up and
Yes.
they wanted to, instead of say, fuck the government, they wanted to talk about interpersonal relationships, and, they started falling in love or thinking about different things. And that's where emo, Ian pushes back against that term. He was like, emo,
Yeah, it was
everything's emotional.
Everything was
like
emotional.
every band was emotional, but
Crossover, right? Yeah. Like Embrace and Fugazi was like the crossover. They didn't go metal. They went.
And I really loved, like, Ian MacKaye's always stuck to his guns about no Minor Threat reunion, doesn't want to go backwards in time.
Yeah.
That was its time. It had its era, and he respects it. It seems like I never met the guy, but he seems to have that
totally
seems to be
right.
his idea.
Yeah.
And everything he does forward is present. It's in the present.
yeah, and just look at every Fugazi record. They never repeated themselves, no pun intended with repeater. But every record sounded different,
Right.
and they always were growing. And it, you got to give them their props for that.
So I'm looking at some of your photos, and I see that photo of Marginal Man, which is like one of my favorite photos from that back in the DC that you've taken. And I didn't know that you took that picture until today, really. Can you talk about that show and, I mean, what that band meant to you?
Yeah, they were. I always enjoyed seeing them because they were more melodic and they had a lot of sing-along kind of things. And I think they probably had more influence. Like another band like Black Market Baby was like that. I think they had more influence by like the Clash than, maybe the Sex Pistols or something. But the Sex Pistols were like, it's just funny how that was such a scandalous thing, and you listen to it now and it's like blues rock, it's like it's just like, not.
It's actually well played, well crafted songs.
Yeah. It's
Sing
just,
along.
Yeah. But yeah, I enjoyed seeing them a lot, and then I kind of became a little friendly with them, and it was funny because they said, "Oh, we see you taking pictures all the time. We're like putting out a record. Could we meet and like look at some of your photos?" And I was like, "Sure." That was like probably one of the first times where someone in a band asked me to look at, and then they're like, well, we can meet with our manager. And I was like, oh, these guys, they're pros. They have a manager and shit and stuff. I found out later it's just their friend,
Right.
And brother of one of the guys that was in the band. But yeah, they looked at my pictures, and then they picked that one and they put it on the inside sleeve of their first record. And, I don't even think I asked them for any money. Like back then, I was just doing it. I wasn't thinking about it as a career yet. And those guys like Kenny Inouye and all of them, they were friends, and they were, good guys. And that photo is funny because I've had what you just said happen to me like many times. People will be talking, and they'll find out that I took that photo. And like one guy was like, he was so incredulous. He's like, that photo, like, I don't even know if he remembered the name of the band, but he was like, that photo of the guy jumping over the drummer. And I was like, yeah. And then he's like, he gets on his phone and he's like, this photo? And I'm like, yeah, I took that photo. He's like, wow, you took that photo? Like, and it's funny because sometimes, I mean, they're definitely never got as popular as Minor Threat or whatever, but that photo, I mean, it's unique, and it's a lot of energy, and the drummer's face and the singer's face. And I like the way the chord, like it's
The rainbow.
you can see the motion happening,
Yeah.
and you know where it was, and you know where it's going by the chord and everything.
Did you take, okay, so when you're taking all these photos, you have to be pretty quick and in the right moment. There's a lot going on at once, and you went on past punk rock, and you started to do some other type of photography and more journalistic type stuff. And I know that you did some work and starting around 91 around the NAFTA stuff, and you were documenting some of that, right? And did that experience working in the anarchic kind of crazy environment of punk rock help you to frame your photos and figure out where to be at the right time and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did go to college for photography, but I went to Maryland University because it was a big university, and I thought, oh, they'll have photography classes because I was a dumbass 18-year-old. And I get there, and they don't have any photography class. They have like one, and it's in the fine art department, and that's not the kind of stuff I wanted to do. So I dropped out of there, and then I went over to the community college, and I'm like, do you guys have photography classes? And they're like, oh, we have a ton, like photojournalism, portraiture, like all kinds of stuff. So I'm like, all right. So I enroll there, and I just start taking photography classes. It's local community college. I just commute and stuff. And I had planned on finishing and getting a 4-year degree, but I took my portfolio around. I started getting work, like with the local papers, and then I got something in the Washington Post, and it paid like really well for 1986. I got like $1,200 for the cover of this weekend section, the section where they tell you all the shit that's going on the weekend and stuff. So I'm like, well, I'm going to college to do this, and now I'm doing it. So I always thought I might go back and finish, but I never did. And I just started working from that time. And remind me of your question.
Oh, I was just wondering about your experience in punk rock photography.
Oh, how it influenced
you to go on into photojournalism.
Yeah, I think it totally did, because framing, I was learning, if you just look at all these photos, a lot of the early ones, I was learning how to frame and expose a photo. And I like to say, there is a lot of mayhem and chaos, but I also love these quiet moments. You can drop these in, and when I talk about it if you want, but like this Faith photo where he's leaning back, it's like I love the stage diving and the mayhem, but I also love moments like that, and like John Stab over here in GI, like laying on the floor, he's just like kind of having an emotional experience, and this void shot too. So I did like to I was learning how to compose an image. And you mentioned that NAFTA thing. That's actually, I got hired by a senator that was against NAFTA to go document labor and environmental abuses in Mexican border towns. And I really loved it, because I thought that's where I was going to go with my career, like social justice kind of stuff and travel. It mixed a lot of things that I liked. I liked to travel, and then I went on a 4-month trip in the early 90s all over it was half vacation, just like backpacking with my girlfriend, and half like I went to Palestine and I hooked up with UNRWA, and I went to UN schools and documented the schools and stuff, and then I would sell those to Middle East Report or magazines that were out of Washington and stuff. So I kind of felt like that's what I wanted to do, but it didn't. I had kids and I didn't want to travel as much, and I didn't want to be in dangerous areas as much, and so I always worked in arts and entertainment more than news so much. So this music, shooting this stuff, kind of set me up for my whole career, because I shot for people like the Grammy Foundation, the people that do the Grammys, and the Recording Industry of America, and Americans for the Arts, all these nonprofits that just support the arts. And so, yeah, it did give me, I definitely think punk rock taught me how to have, in addition to what I learned in college, that was more like technical stuff, but it did teach me how to make a good photo and go for work with these arts companies rather than trying to chase ambulances or something like that.
But it also gave you a foundation of how to be in the middle of an event and be able to successfully photograph it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because that's another thing too. I do a lot of, I was a DP on, like we talked about Salad Days, I did a lot of concert films, some Wilco, like we did a Wilco movie, and Jeff Tweedy solo tour, and you have to sort of know how to capture something and not get in the way too. So,
do you think that this kind of photography really did end up influencing other scenes on how to behave at shows and how to act? I know we kind of covered that a little bit already, but do you feel like you are a part of the exportation of?
I don't know if I would. That's a good question. I don't know if I would take a lot of the credit. I think I would put the credit more to Fugazi, who were very popular. And when people, like, there's a scene in Salad Days, and they expanded on it that I shot on video. I didn't shoot a lot of video shows back then, but I just took my video camera to this one Fugazi show, and they expanded on this scene in that movie. We Are Fugazi from Washington D.C. It's fan sourced footage, and it's really good. If it comes out here, you guys should check it out. When they said they were going to do it, I thought that's going to suck. Like, those video cameras sounded like shit then. But what they did is Fugazi recorded almost practically every show, and they took this video footage and Brendan synced it with the board recording. So it sounds great, and the video runs the gamut from different qualities. But anyway, there was a scene in that movie that I shot where a guy just keeps jumping into the audience and kicking all these people with his boots, and and Guy just gets like fed up, and he jumps into the audience and just grabs the guy, and I don't think he punched him, but he just made him stop, and he was like, "Stop kicking people in the fucking head." He's like, "You want to kick someone in the head? Come up here. I'll lay down. You can kick me in the head. Like, don't kick these women and these other people that are just trying to enjoy the show and stuff." And people gave him shit for that. They were like, you used to slam dance, and we just want to have fun. But someone had their neck broken at a Fugazi show and was paralyzed, and they, not in DC, I think it was, I don't know where it was. Ian told me about it one time, but it's just you want people to be safe. You don't want anyone to get hurt at your show. I mean, you make you feel terrible.
I believe that was in Los Angeles at a Rock for Choice benefit concert.
Yeah, you may be right.
The first time I ever saw someone escorted out of a show was a Fugazi show, and it was a guy throwing a shoe or something. He was just goofing around doing something stupid, but they brought him on stage, very politely patted him on the back,
And
showed
then
him
took
the
him
back,
off.
showed the
Yeah.
back door.
Yeah.
Said they were going to
Ian
refund
say,
his money.
Sir, you're not welcome here, sir.
Yeah. Yeah.
That and I saw something else I've never seen before with Ian MacKaye. I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I saw his other project, The Evens, and it was at an art gallery similar to this one, and he had everyone sit down on the ground for the entirety of the set. And people did it. People were kind of just vibing and the whole thing. It was something for me as a punker. At the time, I wasn't exposed to that kind of, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
a real purposeful, we're here to enjoy it in a much different way. You know what I mean?
Right.
Than that more violent, visceral way you're used to.
How many times did you see Fugazi?
Twice.
And did Ian do the whole puppet master, freeze the audience and like bring them back?
I don't recall. I can't recall. I just remember it was really it stands out in my mind, the guy with the shoe. But as far as stopping the show all the time, I heard he
guy.
was known for sort of stopping the.
He would stop and have everyone freeze, and then they do count-offs to start again.
I don't recall.
I don't remember
Wow, that's
that.
interesting. I don't recall that. The show I'm talking about was at the Palladium towards the end of their run. And then I saw them one other time during, I think, that same era. So it was later on before they broke up, but later end of their career. I don't recall that. And the Evans thing, that was more of a, this is a more low-key event type of thing. I don't recall the freeze restart thing, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he would stop the show and just have everyone take a breath, and he'd stop in the middle of a song if it was getting really violent, and he saw
Right.
someone getting hurt, and usually they would finish the song and be like, and I never had a problem with that because I don't want to get hurt at a show, and people felt that he was preachy or whatever, but.
I mean, the shows are fun, though. I remember seeing Fugazi, probably the same shows that you went to, and I used to remember, just a lot of like jumping up and down,
my
and just
God.
a lot
Just
of it was
amazing.
fun,
Like
yeah.
everyone was. There's a scene in both Saladays and that We Are Fugazi movie where this friend of mine, Jim Spellman, shot. He got up in like there was some construction. He got up high at Wilson Center, and you see the whole stage and the audience, and they play Waiting Room, and it's like you've never seen anything more joyous. Like the whole crowd is moving together, one symbiotic, like just joyous thing. It's like it's the best thing ever.
So you photographed them a lot. Were you there right at the very start of that band? Were you able to witness that?
Almost. They played a couple shows before Guy joined the band, and I never saw them as a three-piece. And then that was like 87, and then I think he joined the band shortly thereafter, and people started saying, like, I was still sort of not fully back into the scene, but people, so you got to see Ian's new band and stuff. And then I saw them at that community college that I went to school at. They played there, and I mean, it immediately just blew me away. Like, I really, I loved Gang of Four, and that kind of bass heavy, like, I mean, Big Black isn't a good comparison to them, but like, just like, I was immediately attracted to it because I wasn't the biggest Embrace fan. I thought they were kind of like, like they just swapped out MacKaye brothers with the Faith, and it's like, and then it was it was okay, but I just it never spoke to me that much. But this band was just like, I felt it in my bones from the first time. And then they're the band I seen and photographed the most by far. I have just thousands of frames of Fugazi.
And they always had that, what was it, $5 ticket price, right?
Yeah.
That was always cool.
Yeah, that was cool. I mean, always affordable. They always tried to do hall shows and not venue shows when they could. Like, they played venues, but they always like alternative spaces, shows put on by kids, not promoters so much.
Would you tour with them?
I did. I didn't do a full tour. I did see them out of town a few times, even one time in Berlin, which was great because seeing them, their longtime roadie and friend, Mark Sullivan, said once that you've never really seen Fugazi until you've seen him outside of DC, because there's just a lot of baggage in DC. Most of the shows were, all the shows were benefits. They know generations of people at the show, and like it, but if you see them, like I caught them in Berlin, they probably play there maybe once every 2 years or 2.5 years. So they really they play songs that they wouldn't play at home too. Like they had stopped playing Waiting Room by then, but they played it there, and it was just like, it was great. And there's a picture from that show here where Guy is just like covered in sweat and kind of holding on to the mic, trying to prevent just exhaustion and collapsing. And but yeah, like Jem Cohen traveled with them. He made the movie Instrument and stuff. He did more extensive like touring with them. They invited me to that when they played Lorton Prison. That was a Mark Anderson Positive Force thing. He 1990, December 26th, they went and played a show for the Juvenile Correctional Center at this prison in Virginia.
Johnny Cash style, huh?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Like, the kids weren't as much into Fugazi as the inmates were into Johnny Cash, but they didn't, they were. But it was a fun. It was a good experience.
I heard that, and you always hear urban legend type of stuff, but this isn't so extreme. But like, they get together and still play every year. They jam together every year, but they have no plans on reuniting. But they still get together every year and play a little bit for themselves. Is that, have you ever heard
I can't confirm or deny that. Like and not because I'm trying to be. I just don't know if that's true. Like,
Yeah.
Guy lives in New York and Brooklyn. The rest of them are in DC. Live pretty close to one another. Joe is in a band with Brendan. Joe is in a band with Ian. But I have not heard that they play just to keep their chops up or for shits and giggles or anything.
I want to believe it. I want to believe that they get together once a year and just have like a reunion and just for fun, with nobody there. I like the idea.
It's cool. If you ask my opinion, I would probably say it's apocryphal, like it's not true.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah.
False.
You hear that, Victor? Okay.
Right on. Well, you know what? I think, we're really excited that we were able to come out and meet with you. And can you just let us know what's coming up next for your exhibits and all that?
Sure. I'm showing here until it's a short run. It only is going to be up till the 21st of September, so about another week and a half. And then the next exhibit is going to be that I'm working on other stuff, and I'm trying to get something back in Northern California. I'd like to do something in the Bay Area, and I'm talking to people about that. This one, I kind of wanted to see how this one went. It went well, and I got a good reception, and a few people saw this and were like, why aren't you coming to San Francisco? So I think there's some interest. I do have a show in Baltimore, Maryland, at a club called it's actually a rock club called the Metro Gallery. They have shows, and then I'm working on one in Philly. I'm doing in October, if anyone is in like Chapel Hill, Athens, Georgia, Atlanta, South Carolina, like Charleston, South Carolina. I'm going down to that music festival called The Fest in Gainesville, Florida, and I'm going to photograph that. And I'm doing a book talk there at the last Sunday in October. I think it's the 26th or 27th. And I'm going to do dates on the way down where I do this book talk that people seem to enjoy. I show slides and I give people like background stories, and like, so I give them a little detail about these photos that if they come, they're probably fans. So these are photos they've seen a lot, and to give them a little backstory and a little backstory on me, how I came to photographing music. And then I sign books and sell prints and stuff. Sometimes I have pop-up art shows if the space has the space to show them, I'll just bring half a dozen pictures and put them up for the evening.
Do you have an official mailing list or list on social?
Yeah,
Your events?
I can be found at Jim Saah, JimSaah on Instagram.
Jim Saah?
Jim Saah. And then I have a website that is also just my name, jimsaah.com. And I'm still on Facebook because there's just a lot of old punkers on Facebook that don't really, some of them don't do Instagram, but so it's like I reach out to those people. I don't really go on it much. I just post stuff about shows I'm doing.
Nice. What about you, Jennifer? What's coming up?
Nothing.
Ooh,
That's a
vacation?
lie.
No touring, no.
Yeah,
You got- you're
L7's
very busy.
continuing.
Yeah.
You played some shows recently, haven't you, L7?
You went to Canada, right?
Yeah. No, that's this weekend.
Oh, that's this weekend. This weekend. Tonight?
So you hear that, Canada?
I'm in Canada as we speak.
Yeah.
Modern technology.
This is a virtual
I'm
image
playing
of
the show
Jennifer.
right now.
Zoom calls have gotten really, really good.
Oh, yeah.
My
This isn't
friend,
over.
who's an engineer in New York, he works at Little Steven Van Zandt's studio. Jeff Sanoff. He saw you guys play there, and he was just blown away. He was like, he was a fan back in the day, and I don't know if he went in with low expectations, but yeah, you guys blew him away.
That's usually how it works.
Yeah,
In my life as well.
yeah. I always try and
You know,
have
we
low
just, L7
expectations.
just played Black Cat.
Just when?
Yeah. Well, last year.
Okay, yeah, I thought
Yeah.
so. I missed
End of last year.
yeah, because it was around the time you played that show that I was just mentioning in New York. I think. you
Yeah, it was
guys, like-
incredible. The backstage.
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
Yeah,
Dante, Brendan, Dave Grohl,
Mm-hmm.
Pete from Scream.
yeah,
It was amazing.
yeah. I should have went to that show. It
That's
was-
great.
Yeah, I don't know why I
sounds
missed
cool.
Barely could fit in the room with those egos.
it. Yeah, yeah.
I had to go change in the bathroom.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Nice, nice.
Teasing.
yeah. I know.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you guys. And what's up next for us is we're just continuing to interview. We're still looking for help with our documentary. We've got some potential opportunities that have been given to us that we're trying to hash out. So hopefully the Orange County Punk documentary will come out. But yeah, we're definitely hammering at that. And yeah, that's all.
Yeah, we have another podcast that we're working on at a local record shop in Huntington Beach. And we're working on that. I'm really excited because it's one of my hometown, since I was a kid, record stores. So we'll bring more information when we have it.
You gotta love those record stores. Like when I discovered punk rock, the first thing I did was go to my local record store. It was called Joe's Record Paradise, and those old heads, they can be curmudgeons, but like I'm like, I heard this music, like the Stranglers and stuff, and they're like, yeah, we have that. And then they're like, you know, there's local bands that play punk rock, and I'm like, and right here, there's bands in my own backyard, and they totally.
Well, if you're in or around Huntington Beach, go check out Vinyl Solution. Go say hi to Drac. Drac, we love you. And you know, it's one of the first punk rock record stores that I ever set foot in 1992 or three. They were only open about a year, and they gave me shit endlessly back then for being a you'd ask for a certain band, they'd be like they just berate you, right?
Yeah. You
So
love that.
I know what you mean about
Yeah.
the old heads.
Well, yeah.
Anyway, thanks again. We really appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers.
Before punk rock, I went to like arena shows. You know, my brother took me to see Bruce Springsteen in 1980. You know, at this big basketball arena and stuff, and I was like, oh, this is what a concert is. Like the people are down there, and you're up here, and you just sit there and you watch. But then I went to a punk rock show, and like that picture of Minor Threat, like, you know, you could participate. You know, you could sing along. This is the guy I went to the show with, my friend John, and the mic is gone, and he's still singing, and everyone's like singing, and it's a joyous communal experience, and that's one. I mean, the music was a big draw, but that community was, and you know, when you're a kid, 16 years old, you're looking for your people, and I found my people.
Did you develop your own film? Did you print your own work?
All the above. Yeah, I was in still in high school and was taking a photography class. So they gave you a camera to do assignments over the weekend and to take home with you, and a couple rolls of film. And I would take it to shows. And I tried to sell the teacher on, you know, the punk rock stuff. I'm like, oh, it's documentary, it's like whatever. But I still had to do the assignments, portraiture or whatever. But yeah, and then I would develop them at school. And
Did you actually turn this in for a grade?
I think some of them I may have, but he didn't get it. I mean, he was a great guy, and he's still alive. And I shouted him out when my book was reviewed in the Washington Post, and he saw it, and it was nice. But he was just super supportive. He didn't really get punk rock, but he actually made a photography 3 class that didn't exist for just me and some other guy that just wanted to keep going, and it was sort of self-directed. So he was a great supportive dude.
Did anyone at your age question your position in this? Like, that it could be dangerous, or
Yeah, there was
their equipment could be damaged?
Yeah, he did. The teacher didn't, but I probably kept it on the down low. But I did have some jockey friends or acquaintances that were like questioning the whole punk rock thing, like it was stupid or whatever. Like there's this one guy that I remember that used to kind of push back, like on the whole stage diving and whole thing, and talk shit about it, and he likes all my shit on Instagram now and stuff. And I think he bought my book and stuff, and I'm like, you know, that's cool. Like, you know, you just took you 40 years to get it.
Do you recognize when you were young your ability to use light in this and contrast? Was that something you were conscious of, being able to get those highlights and the detail throughout?
Yeah, it was.
Was it a choice, or in the moment were you just run and film?
I think it would be disingenuous to say that I came out of the gate with like fully formed aesthetic and stuff, but it definitely grew. Like back then, the punk bands just didn't like a lot of light, and a lot of the hall shows, there was just
no light,
fluorescent lighting, just shitty lighting. No one brought like lights in.
This is a flash, though. No?
Yeah, that's where I was getting at. Almost all of them were flash. That's flash too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Such great exposure on this.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
That's the Wilson Center, right?
No, that's Landsberg.
Oh.
It was an old department store in DC that closed down, and they just didn't know. They were trying to find a developer for it, and it was just this gigantic space that they rented out to bands. This was Minor Threat's last show. They didn't know it at the time, but it was billed as the Punk Funk Spectacular. It was the Big Boys, which I have a photo in this show, from this show, and then Minor Threat, and then Trouble Funk, the famous DC go-go band, played.
So who put on these shows? Like, would it be
the bands? There was a couple of promoters. Steve Blush was a promoter. I think he's out here now.
Positive Force.
Yeah, Positive Force was. They were all benefits mainly. Positive Force was like a social justice organization that still exists today, and they would put on the shows. And then a lot of times bands would just do it themselves. Mm-hmm. It was DC was completely DIY. I mean, that's why I started a fanzine and stuff. Like, I always thought, I wish a magazine would publish my photos. And then when I got involved with the scene and I saw people making their own records and making their own record covers, I was like, I'll just make my own magazine. And I did. I did a number of fanzines. That is Fugazi, and that's the cover of the Repeater record.
Oh, okay.
It's I'm sure you're familiar with that record. They cut out the words Fugazi Repeater, and you only see the pictures and the words, and the rest is white. So you can tell sort of what it is, but I always show this one because, you know, I love that record, and it's a popular record, and it's nice to see the full image and not just cut out of the words.
One of my favorite things to do when I look at anything from this era, the shoes.
Yeah.
So I love when the shoes are in because they really like distinguish where clothing doesn't always distinguish the era, but the shoes do.
Yeah. I mean, people were in the Vans even, back then, but a lot of people just had like chucks with tape all over them. I mean, these kids were not poor. It wasn't like the scene out here. I mean, they're, like the famous Black Flag, rehearsing in a squad and, living on a few dollars a day and stuff. These kids, by and large, were kids of solidly middle class people. So it was a very different scene in that regard. But yeah, I put this picture purposely on the front of my book because it's kind of like welcome to the show, and then this is on the back cover because Guy famously, I mean, Fugazi always gave their all at every show, but he, when Rites of Spring and Fugazi, he really, like, that's why he did crazy things like climb on things. It's like he lost his mind a little bit and he was just so in the music. And this was the last note of the last song and the mic stands went down and he just like, bam, and I took this shot. I sort of worked a little bit backwards, since I sort of missed the late 70s, mid 70s New York scene, and then I discovered the first bands I heard were like British bands like the Stranglers and and probably the Ramones and the Buzzcocks and stuff like that. And then I got into DC hardcore like full on, and I was like all about like hardcore punk, we would say. I'm into hardcore punk, not punk, just because to differentiate between like the nihilistic Sex Pistols and stuff. Like we were, Bad Brains had the PMA, the positive mental energy, but then I started, how you start working backwards, and you're like, oh, who were these bands listening to? And bands that were very influential to DC bands are bands you wouldn't think, like the Cramps were hugely influential to Ian MacKaye and those guys. He says in Salad Days, he saw the Cramps in 1979, went home and cut his hair. Like he was like, I'm going to start a band, and the Damned also hugely influential. And then this room sort of shows how I branched out. Like I wanted to photograph all kinds of music. I worked backwards, just Lou Reed, the Velvet Underground, Iggy Pop. This is the Talking Heads Stop Making Sense tour. Still love Talking Heads like immensely.
When you took these images, did you have a specific intention of where they would show up? Like, did the magazine or fanzine or newspaper send you to these shows?
Eventually, I got hired by NME, and I worked for the Washington Post for arts and entertainment for most of the 90s and stuff. But this is like a little early. I think I did a fanzine, and sometimes I would call promoters and stuff and lie about the circulation of my fanzine and say it was a lot bigger and I want to photograph it. And things were much chiller back then. Not that many people were asking for photo passes. So I would get into a lot of them. Like probably the same thing with that Lou Reed show. And I actually got an interview with him for my fanzine, which didn't go well, but like most interviews with Lou Reed. In the 80s, at these kind of clubs, there was really no such thing as a photo pass. Like no one cared. If the band specifically told the club, we don't want anyone taking pictures, but that rarely happened. I mean, it happened like once in the 90s when Foo Fighters just started after Nirvana, and Grohl was an investor in this club, the Black Hat in DC, and so
we just played there.
So he did like a secret show there, just to like kind of feel the band before they went on tour, and I got invited to that, but I don't know why I really wish I would have taken pictures at that one, because that would be something. But sometimes it happened. But all these punk rock matinees and stuff, you just showed up with a camera and no one said anything. And then it started changing. The IMP, which I'm sure you know, the big promoter in DC that owns the 930 Club and the Anthem, and they never cared. It was almost the mid 90s or even later that you started to not be able to bring a camera. Like if you had a camera, you needed a photo pass. Mm-hmm. And that was like, I swear it must have been even the early 2000s, because I photographed Fugazi. Oh no, I might have had a photo pass for that one, because I think Spin wanted me to shoot that one. But yeah, it was probably the late 90s when you started to be required to get a photo pass.
It's interesting your perspective, because as a musician, I know that we started requiring photo passes pretty early on because of that exploitation of our own.
Yeah, you wanted to control
image.
Your image.
Yeah, control it. We just didn't want it abused.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that, and I respect that. If a band wants to, like early on, like what you mean, like mid 90s, early 90s.
I'm going to say it earlier. I mean, it was a free for all up until about, I feel, 91. Mm-hmm. But then also that's when the barricade came into being also, and photographers had more, the nature of the shots changed. You can actually kind of see, like I can almost guess where you were with the barricade and where you weren't.